with the EEOC. We got that. But she's worked for the EEOC for over 20 years in a variety of different positions. Right now, she is currently the outreach and education coordinator for the Houston District Office. And so we're just so pleased to have you here. And she's also a member of the Houston LERA board for several years. So thank you very much, Marina. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Everybody can hear me okay? All right. So let me get to this slide. Give me 1 second. Oh, no, you're all right. I got you. Share screen. Oops. If I just open it and start as that. No. The one button. Gotcha. All right. There we go. We're working now. Thank y'all so much. I'll be honest with you. I was nervous about it because I thought, well, let me put something together. And then I thought, well, nobody will show up and it'll be just fine. So thank you for being here. We are, apologetic. Judge Rondon definitely wanted to come here. She was really heartbroken about canceling. She wasn't feeling well and we want her to take care of herself. So when Nikki and I discussed this and I said, I don't mind, I'll step in. He said, what about talking about what is going to happen at EEOC? We have no idea, right? That's why we put the whole crystal ball there. We're going to talk about what we know because that's all we can do. There's a lot of uncertainty, but at the end of the day, we're going to figure it out. I get this question a lot, especially recently. It kind of made me feel a little certain kind of way. I did an event with this youth group, and a very young gentleman, high school age, came and said, what do you think about what's going to happen with the new administration? That was not a conversation I was thinking I was going to have with a high school child, youngster. And I thought, well, I don't know. And so he went into this deep conversation. And I thought, I probably should start looking into this, right? I should probably be a little bit more concerned. My hope is this, that I'm going to share with you as much as I know. I think the little kind of, asterisk on the presentation should have been, she's not going to have all of the answers because I don't, but I'm going to try to answer as many of your questions as possible. Does anybody remember the Magic 8 Ball back in the day? That's kind of how I feel. We're just going to shake it up and see what happens. I think it's going to keep coming up with, we're going to see, right? No clear answer. We'll come back to that later because there is a lot of uncertainty, right? With any, and it doesn't matter what political party it was, that's not the thing. It's just change. And it's this new, what are we going to do? How are we going to approach things? We're going to just keep moving forward. That's really all that we can do. With any change comes uncertainty, right? Regardless of who was going to come in and who was going to take over, we're going to have some things that we're going to change. So I've been with the EEOC for a little over 25 years, and I tried to count. I went back and I lost count. So it's about 8 or 9 different directors that I worked through. And if any of you in your work experiences, when you're going to have a new boss or a new leader, you kind of start figuring out who this person is. Google their name, find out if they come from another office, external, who are they, what are they about? They come from another office, you call the people of that office, like, what is this person? I think that's human nature, right? We want a little bit of information to help us to figure out, what are we looking for? What are we looking at? What are we doing? So the reality is your guess is as good as ours is what's going to happen because we just don't know. But I will say this. The good thing is that we've had this in the past, right? We've had this administration before. And so we're going to figure it out. There were some things that we can go back and say, well, this is what happened the last time. Doesn't mean that those things are going to happen or it's going to be any massive changes. What I will say, and you'll hear me say throughout the presentation, is stay tuned, because when things change with our agency, you'll get that notification. right? We're going to put that information out there. I will put that information out there because I think it's important for all of us to just kind of be aware. We're going to go over all of what we can, right, today. So I like this quote, our whole future lies in uncertainty, so we have to live immediately. There's no other option. We just got to keep going. Tomorrow's going to come, January's going to come, the next 4 years, the years after that are going to come, and we're just going to keep on going, right? We do have, though, this isn't our first rodeo, so we do have a little bit of a playbook of what happened the last time the administration came in. And so that's what we're going to kind of rest on, because that's the only thing that we have that's certain. Now, I apologize for the graph. I thought it was going to show up bigger than this, but this is what I kind of wanted to see. Like, where did we see any changes, anything different? So these are kind of all of the charges that EEOC received nationwide from 2016 all the way to 2023. And so you'll see, I just kind of wanted to give you that wide perspective. So you saw kind of a decline in the charges. And then I want to say that's 2021. You saw a really deep decline in the charges, and then it started to progress back up. Last year, we had 81,000 charges, a 20% increase from 2022 to 2023. I'll say this, and again, this is just my own perspective. Regardless of who the administration is, harassment, discrimination still happens. Oh, sorry. Oh, it's not showing. Oh, sorry. It's not showing on the Zoom end.
Correct.
Oh, sorry about that.
We can see it now. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for that. My apologies to my Zoom friends. So this is the chart, right? 2016 through 2023 and the difference of changes. And again, as I was saying, with the difference in administration, discrimination is still going to happen. Those things are still going to be there. You'll see, right? What was it, 2020? We saw COVID, so that might have had an impact. I don't think that this means we're going to see less charges, right? The unfortunate reality is we don't have enough people to investigate them. So you might just see longer processing times and things of that sort. But it doesn't mean that discrimination is going to all of a sudden stop or get worse or get better. It's just going to happen. And so letting people know that we're available. Now, we are transitioning. We've been transitioning for a little while into more in person. We'll talk about that mediation. But we do have people available in person because the public is coming back in great numbers, right? So our office opens officially at 8 o'clock. I'm told that people are back to standing in the hallway in the building waiting for us as early as 6 o'clock to make sure that they can come in and get complaints filed. So that's not going to change. I think that's going to stay constant. I think sometimes what we see, though, is the social things, the things that are going on in the world do also have impact on the types of charges that we're seeing. We're still going to see a lot of charges. It's just going to be what are the basis of the charges that might be a little bit different. Now, I like to do a little bit of fun fact, right? Because I also want to keep you engaged. Can anybody guess, or no wrong answers, what state do you think leads with the most EEOC charges filed across the United States? Any guesses? Texas? California? Every time I ask this question, most people think New York, California, big states, multiple of people, millions of people. It's actually Texas. Texas leads, and by leaps and bounds, unfortunately, with most charges filed across the US. And I want to say it's been like that at least for the last 3 years. And Texas has been kind of number one. So when you break it down by statutes, race, religion, color, sex, national origin, age, disability, retaliation, Texas just kind of had like number one in majority of them. Texas is kind of like started to surpass all of those statutes. And so we're now number one in almost every statute except for GINA, that last that I remember. And GINA, like California led with 33 charges, Texas had 31. So we're not far behind on that either. So I don't think that's going to change either. I think these things are going to continue to be here. You're seeing them, you're dealing with them, you're responding to these complaints and these charges. So I think that's going to be the constant. Now, I went back and looked at the same stats with our litigation, right? The cases that EEOC actually litigated. And you see that's much more erratic, right, than the charges filed. The charges filed was kind of a progression and the progression back up. Now, I'm not sure why, right? Why these numbers are so erratic as they are. But here's where we are, again, from 2016 to 2023. And under this administration, we hadn't had as many as we did, say, in 2017 and 2018. So we are still seeing cases to be litigated. I think what happens is, what cases are they going to be litigated? Which cases are they going to take into? And we're going to talk about the priorities. We're going to talk about all kinds of things. Now, I will say this, in my 25 years, I was an investigator for 16 years. When I worked with the legal department and as an investigator, it was always about the cases that had impact, the cases that were a priority for the agency as a whole, and the evidence of a case, right, that made them decide, like, these are the ones that we're going to actually take on for litigation. I don't think that's going to change. Impact, priorities, and facts of the case. But we're seeing this here, and we'll talk about what types of cases we're seeing, the trends that we're seeing, because I think that's most important to know and understand what are the things that you should be focusing on, preventative, proactive approaches to addressing these situations. What do you think was the most litigated statute in 2023? So you got Title VII, you got the ADEA, ADA, right? Equal Pay Act, GINA. What statute do you think was the most litigated last year? Any guesses? Labor? General complaints? Harassment? It was actually, so generally speaking, Title VII. But it's the one, it's kind of unfair, right? Because it's the one that has the most bases: race, religion, color, sex, national origin. It includes pregnancy, LGBTQ. So Title VII was the #1 most litigated case. I want to say it was 64% of the cases that EEOC litigated were part of a Title VII. And it could be intersectional. So it could be Title VII with ADA or whatever it may be, but Title VII was the most prominent. And the second of that was ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we're seeing that, right, just in trends of cases, is that the ADA is really coming up fast. After COVID, it just kept going, kept growing. And so we're going to talk about that and how we take those proactive, preventative approaches to addressing disability claims in the work environment. I keep telling people not to sleep on the ADA, Age Discrimination and Employment Act. We're seeing a lot of those cases as well. You see this workforce that's aging. We see people that are different generations, and we're seeing those cases. It hasn't crept up as much as, say, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, but those age cases are starting to make a little bit of a presence as well. I think we mentioned that if you do have questions, you can ask. You don't have to wait till the end of the presentation. So when I started to kind of do, and I'll say this in all fairness, I'm the person who tries to not get involved in the news because it's very depressing. It stresses me out. I have to color my hair way more often than I need to. So I try to not do that. But then there's always this thing about, I need to know, right? I need to get this information. I try to sign up for the webinars of people outside telling, us what's going to happen with the Department of Labor and EEOC and NLRB. So I do webinars and do all of these sessions and things so I can figure out. And one of the things that I keep hearing over and over again is that there will be change in the administration. And that's pretty typical, right? Regardless of what the administration is, that's going to happen. And then you have people that are just going to, their terms are going to expire. So that's natural as well. We currently have 1 vacant commissioner spot, so that will likely get filled. It's supposed to be, right, that it is a bipartisan, so you're going to have Democrats and Republicans. Right now, it's heavier on the Democratic side until 2026. So you have 5 individuals that make up, right, the commission, the chair, the vice chair, the commissioners. So what I keep reading, and there's nothing official yet, is that they're anticipating that Andrea Lucas will become the new chair. There's no conversation yet about who the vice chair is going to be, but that's the indication, is that she will then transition to the chair and replace the current chair, Chair Burrows. When they came through, when the Trump administration came through before, they did the change. Victoria Lipnick and Janet Dillon were appointed to those positions because they want, of course, to have that Republican people in that stead, in the charge of the organization and the agency. Again, there's still one commissioner seat available, so we're anticipating that likely it's going to be filled with a Republican so that it can be balanced as well. But you'll see that some of the terms are going to be extended until 2027, so that won't change too much either. So we're not going to anticipate. Here's the one thing that people keep saying: oh, you're the agency that everybody's going to forget about. Like, it took forever to get to y'all anyways. No one really cares about us, which kind of makes me sad, but also it's fine. But I don't think that there'll be major changes, right? So when Lucas, if she does become the chair, she's been there, she knows how. It's not like she's learning anything new. She's already got the role. She's already been in that process. So I don't think that there'll be major changes, at least immediately. So we'll see what happens. We're just kind of anticipating. Again, that's not anything official. Those are the things that I keep hearing over and over and over again. Everybody just makes that assumption that Andrea Lucas will become the new chair. So it's really hard not to doom scroll, right? To go through this and kind of read all the articles. And especially for today, I wanted to make sure that I was on top of what's the latest, kind of what's the buzz, what do people think? This is definitely not coming from EEOC. This is everything that I went on the internet and overwhelmed myself with in those last couple of days. So these are the areas that if you go through and look, like, what is the new administration going to mean for the EEOC? These are the topics that come up over and over and over again. And so I'm just going to tell you what I heard, what I saw, right? What I heard through the grapevine. Again, we're not sure because we have to wait and see. It's going to be that process. But at the end of the day, these are things that everybody's suggesting. And I can kind of see it, that are going to be a question, a focus, and maybe some changes. Starting with PWFA, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, right? That came into play last year in June of 2023. And there's some question as to, is that going to be looked at in a different light? Some of the concerns, some of the issues that people have with PWFA is that it has protections of abortion, and abortion is associated and affiliated with PWFA. So that might be something that's taken a closer look at. So will they make those adjustments and changes? Quite potentially. And at the end of the day, as I said, we're just going to have to buckle up, go along for the ride. And once they share information of what this is going to look like, if there are going to be changes, the one thing that I can say for sure is the commission's really good about putting all of this information out, right? It'll be on our page. They'll send us information to put out as outreach and education. And so we'll go out and make sure that the community, the employees who have to deal with these things, the employers who have to deal with these things on their side, are clearly aware of what the commission's take is on these matters, right? So Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is one of those things that keeps coming up as a question. We saw that diversity, DE&I, is one of those things that we can't talk about that anymore. And everywhere I go, all the people are like, oh, don't say it. I get it. I understand that, right? Here's the one thing that I do want to say. I did a whole session, and EEOC is very specific about, right, being careful about that because we want to be in compliance, right? But when I went and did this session, I said, when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, those kinds of things, it's not that we're telling anybody, organizations, that you have to hire somebody because of a protected. That's exactly what we say, don't you, right? They have to be qualified and they have to be good fit for the job. We want to make sure that you're broadcasting a wide net so that you get the diverse group of individuals. And why wouldn't you want to get a diverse group of individuals for whatever positions that you're hiring? And it's not about we're saying that, oh, you have to have so many people or whatever it is. Making sure that you are affecting, having that wide net, making sure that everybody has access to positions within your organization. And we're going to talk about the strategic enforcement priorities of the EEOC, where we look at these barriers to recruitment and hiring Is it going to come back to making sure that you're making those opportunities available to everybody? So it's not diversity that we want everybody to hire a specific group, whatever. That's not it. We still want to make sure that decisions are not being made based on a protected status, right? I received a phone call from a young man from an organization that he was the recruiter, and he talked about how his management told him that he could no longer hire white males, and he had a little bit of a weird feeling about it. And I said, you absolutely should. That's a protected status. If they're telling you not to hire white males, then those white males that don't get the job that they're qualified for could absolutely come and file with us. And by the way, are you going to be the scapegoat for the one who chooses not to hire the white males to pull them forward? So we had a very long, detailed conversation. One of the things that I really took pride in throughout my 25 years with the EEOC is making sure people know that everybody has protections. I would do investigations and people would come and say, well, it's reverse discrimination because it's discrimination, period, right? It's not in reverse. I understand what they're saying, but at the end of the day, if they're basing it on your race and your race is why African American, it's the same. For EEOC, that's discrimination. We don't make employment decisions based on a protected status. So diversity is going to be one of those things we look at. EEOC has really not been focusing, or at least outreach hasn't been focusing on it, because we're really just going to make sure that you're doing the right thing with the laws, and we'll talk about compliance. The other area that seems to be kind of the buzz and everywhere that you look is LGBTQ protections, right? Now, this is just my own personal opinion, not EEOC, so I'm going to take my hat off for just a second. It just kind of makes me a little bit nervous if that is going to be. I'm going to hope that it's not, because at the end of the day, when we start taking away rights from a protected group, then all the other protected groups have a potential of taking rights, right? So we have to be really careful. My hope is that we still provide protections under Title VII. Are they going to be different? Is it going to look different? How's that going to go? Are there going to be challenges? Quite potentially. But at the end of the day, my hope is that no one lose rights. We can't just assume that those things aren't happening, are no longer happening. And so this is the one that brings me a little bit of stress. But at the end of the day, we just have to kind of wait to see what happens. I think everybody should have protections in the workplace should they need that. Everybody. One of the things that came up was training, right? Well, you probably seen this where people are like, I don't want to go through this training and it's against my right and it's my privilege to say no or whatever it may be. We're still going to do training because I cannot stress the importance of training staff and how important it is for people to know and understand that they have responsibilities in that work environment to do the right thing. And if you go into EEOC.gov and you see all the cases that are litigated, people need training, right? It's so important. We're just going to potentially shift and be, we're going to shift and focus on areas that we think are the most important. So for us in training, what we do now is just to make sure like these are the areas that really need to be focused on. And we'll talk about that in the SEPs, but vulnerable communities, you're going to hear that over and over and over. And I don't think that's going to change. What does that mean? Anybody who doesn't know that they have protections in the workplace is considered a vulnerable community. And that can be anybody, right? People in rural areas, people who just have no idea, right? We're going to keep doing training. We're going to keep getting out there and making sure people know and understand, because that preventative piece is really what EEOC is about. We really want to focus on prevention. One of the things that we had in the last Trump administration that I was kind of okay with was this transparency thing, right? Where they wanted us to be very clear about what we were doing, why we were doing it, the decisions that we're making. We had to explain it. And then we had to do all of this process. And I know it was a lot of work for the investigators. And mind you, I was not an investigator at that time. I'd already transitioned to this role. But at the end of the day, I'm okay with that. I think we should all be okay with that. If we're doing the right thing and we're making the right decisions based on evidence, we should be able to articulate that. I was a supervisor for a few years, and I always told my investigators, you're going to have to be able to explain why to the charging party, to the respondent, to the attorney, whomever, to your legal department, to me. So know your case, be able to explain your case. I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I kind of like and appreciate that. You'll see more transparency in why we're doing the things we're doing. we started to see a little bit of that too, is kind of like, how do we look at things? Giving you the perspective of how would EEOC look at this case? How would we approach this case? And that never really went away, right? Some of the official processes and documentation might have, but that idea and concept of transparency, making sure you understood our perspective and why we were focusing on that, that has kind of stuck around. So these are kind of, again, not sure if these are, but these are the things that most people are reporting on. Most of the conversations, if you Google, what is this going to look like for EEOC? These are the things that come up most often. At the end of the day, all we can do is just wait to see what happens. Yes, Chip.
The other thing I've been reading about this commission, I think, is issues some guidance on the use of AI, particularly in the hiring process and in the annual evaluation process. And I would suggest that everyone that's not old enough to go back to the off-the-shelf tests that people used to use that had to be contract validated. Just don't buy the product that you're selling off the shelf.
Yes, Chip, that's a 100%. So for my Zoom friends, what Chip is talking about is AI. When EEOC, we're going to talk about it again, when EEOC first started to introduce this concept, it was really focused on disability and how artificial intelligence would have this impact on people with disabilities. But what we started to see very quickly is that that started to kind of branch out to age, race, and all of these other areas. So as Chip mentioned, and it's a point that we're going to make more than one time, is that it's happening, right? I always ask people, are you using it? And they say no. It's like, you kind of are when you go through your resume, maybe even you're looking for buzzwords. That's kind of AI, you're not reading it. But making sure that if you utilize, your clients utilize artificial intelligence for hiring processes, as Chip mentioned, it's extremely important that you vet that. Ask the question about what is the likelihood that this could weed out a protected status, not just people with disabilities or race or age, right? Whatever, to ask them. Because at the end of the day, EEOC is going to take the stance that it was your job to make sure. And now you have it, it's your baby. So guess what? You got to monitor that. And you got to say, well, wait a minute, all of a sudden we're weeding out men, women, whatever that protected status is. So yes, 100%. AI is here. It's not going anywhere. And we're going to have to be very, very comfortable that we're making the right choices and decisions when it comes to that. 100%. So mediation, I will say this, probably isn't going to have a major impact with the change. They really didn't with the change in administration. Their systems and processes are set. They're going to handle these cases before they get to investigation. I was on an event, and this attorney was talking about, kind of the future under the new administration. And one of the things that he said is like, oh, mediations, they're going to have more cases and they're going to get more settlements because that's typically what happens. I don't know. We'll see. That'll be good for them. But you'll see, right, just kind of that progression. So I just real quick reference. So there's a little Chewbacca up there, if anybody's wondering why. So Judge Rendon was going to do this whole thing about Star Wars, and I kind of felt like maybe I should throw something in there. So there's Chewbacca. He's just hanging out. But here's the thing. When we look at mediation, now, the only thing that has impact, I'll say this on mediation, is that when we don't have a lot of cases, then they don't have a lot of cases to mediate, right? That's the impact. But they still work, right? In Houston, there is 3 of them that handle all of the cases. It's wild. I don't know how they do it. They're amazing humans. But you'll see, right, from 2018, they mediated nationwide over 6,000 cases and had $165 million that they brought in solo as just the mediation team. The cases dropped a little bit in 2019 to 6,300. The number's not that different though, 159 million, even though they had that drop in cases. And then 2020, they had another drop of 6,200 cases that they successfully mediated, 156. So you're really not seeing a major impact to the monetary benefits that they've brought in. And then 2021, they had the increase in cases. And of course they had the increase in monetary, 6,000 cases, over 6,600 cases, with $176 million received. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of change or impact to our mediation team, mediation process, mediation department. So for you mediators, you're going to stay busy, right? We're going to keep on this process. Last year, so you'll see the major jump, right? So from 20 to 21, there's a gap, but last year, 2023, over 7,000 charges that were mediated with EEOC. Remember, there was 81,000 charges received, and the mediators successfully mediated 7,471 of those cases. And they brought in over $201 million in benefits. And so we're very proud of our mediation program. Most of the question that I get about mediation when we do anything to talk about mediation is, are they going to keep the virtual? I think a lot of people really enjoyed that and some people not so much. But they did a study to try to figure out, was this something that worked? Was it something that was beneficial? There was a 70% approval rating saying that they wanted to keep the virtual aspect of this. Because if you think about it, who really wants to drive to downtown Houston? I work there and I don't. But the cost, right, benefit of doing it virtually, you don't have to take a whole day because you can log in, log back off when you're done. So some people also said that they felt safer. Unfortunately, we are sometimes dealing with some very egregious cases of harassment, things of that sort. And so people don't feel comfortable sitting in a space with these other individuals. And so, that provided that. Now, don't know what's going to happen, but I will say this. We're all about public service. We're about making sure that people get what they want and what they need. When they said people want to come back into the office and file charges in person, the commission said no problem, opened our doors back up right after COVID, allowed people back in. If people say we want that virtual option for mediation, we're probably going to go ahead and accommodate that, right? We have the options. We know it's successful. I don't feel like that's going to make a major impact. However, if somebody says we absolutely want to come in and do this, then you work with the mediator and that can be accomplished as well because we still have those spaces available. So I don't think that there's going to be much change to that. My hope is that people will do the virtual option because the Mickey Leland Federal Building is a nice place, but oh my God, it's a mess half the time, right? Don't come anytime near the holidays because you can't get in the building because everybody's trying to get their passport. So when you're scheduling mediation, plan accordingly. If it's before a holiday or in the summer, don't do it. And just make that suggestion because it is wild. Yes.
So just a point on this and what we're seeing at the FMCS, we provide mediation services for a lot of other federal agencies for their internal sort of pre-EEO dispute resolution process that they're required to have. And we went from 100% in person to 100% virtual in 2020, right? And then as time passed, we went back to some in person, and almost to an agency, they all chose to stay virtual through our contracts that we have with them. And one of the points that also almost to an agency they mentioned is they didn't see, and we have pretty high settlement rates.
Yeah.
I'm going to say in probably the 90th percentile settlement rates. They didn't see a change in settlement rates from when we were doing 100% in person to go into 100% virtual in 2020 by necessity, right?
Sure, right.
Lockdown. And so when the opportunity to go back in person, I think some of it was cost driven because they didn't have to pay mileage and per diem and things like that. But they chose to stay virtual, maybe for financial reasons, but also supported by their own internal auditing to say they had not seen a significant change in
Correct.
settlement rates.
It was working.
And I only mention that because that's the first thing you hear from people who are not accustomed to working in a virtual environment is, oh, it can't be as good.
Right.
There's got to be just tons of opportunities for, and it's tougher as a mediator, I'll tell you. But we've not seen that, and so I wanted to offer that.
Yeah, no. So Walter, for our Zoom friends, Walter is mentioning the fact that what the work they do for federal mediations, they did not see a loss of revenue or impact. They still had the same impact. And so sticking with that model. And I think that's kind of where we would be. I think that's the same idea because why would we, they want to make more effective for government. And I think this is it. So you give people what they want. We want to come in person. Great. We'll give you an option to come in person. Do you want to do it virtual? Great. We can do that as well. And I think like very similar to what you're saying, that study basically said mediation still had a 90% approval rate of people saying, we do this again. And I think that idea and concept of the ease, the convenience, the safety, the flexibility, right? Because, you know, just me personally, and I don't know about any of you, like I certainly don't want to be in downtown Houston past about 2:30 on any given day. So if you want to do a mediation, you could do it at any point in the day. And if you need somebody who's busy, you can do it in the afternoon, and they can certainly accommodate that, or you're not rushing through. So I think very similar to what you're saying, Walter, is the same thing that EEOC, and I think that's why we would probably keep that as an open option. And we didn't see, right, a change in any of that when we went to that virtual. I think people really appreciated it because, again, the McKinley Building is a fabulous building. I love it. It's just not the most conducive, right? Parking is horrible and the whole thing, right? Just downtown is sometimes a nightmare. I don't think we're going to see, and I get paid to be down there, but I still don't like to do it. We're not going to see a major change to the mediation program, right? And regardless of what administration has been there in the whole, since 1999 when it started, it's just been progressing. It's very sturdy. It's one of the highest rated, right, programs that we have. So I think we're going to be okay in that front. So we won't see too many changes when we talk about mediation. So here's the thing, right? And when I was thinking about this, I thought, we have to do this anyways, right? Tomorrow is going to come in January and next year and 4 months and 4 years from now, we have to keep moving forward. We don't have time to sit down and figure it out and wait for things to happen because life is going to continue to happen. And then in the end of 4 years, if there's a new, administration, that we go through this conversation again about what's going to happen, what's going to change, we just buckle up and get ready for the ride. That's basically all we can do. There are some things that I felt like it was going to be really important for us to talk about, and I hope you'll indulge me, because at the end of the day, all we can do is take what we have, take what we know, and move forward in a very positive direction until they tell us to recalculate, right? We got to just keep on trucking, right? The cartoon was Dory, right? Just keep moving. At the end of the day, that's all we can do. I like this quote: never let the future disturb you. You will meet, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which you do today, right, against the present. So we have the logic, we have the information, we have these skills, we have these knowledge, we have the indication of what EEOC does and what we expect and what you can expect of us. We're just going to move forward with that until we get told something different. That's it. Nothing else that we can do. So we're going to talk about these particular areas, trends. I think it's just really important for you to understand what we're seeing so that you know what to expect and what types of things, if you're not seeing them, to brace for, because they're going to happen. We're going to talk about mitigating risk, because for us, it's the most important thing when we talk about prevention. EEOC, even though it doesn't seem like it all the time, it's about prevention. If we don't have to have these charges, we'd be okay with that. And so that's partly my job, is to make sure that people understand risks. And then ethical approaches to compliance, because it's just important for us to all be on the same page and do the right thing, because it's the right thing to do. So with the EEOC from 2024 to 2028, we have these strategic enforcement priorities. And if you don't know about them, they're on the website. There's very detailed information. Could they possibly be updated, changed, modified? Quite potentially. But here's the thing. This is what we have. This is what we're going to move forward with. And this is what I'm going to share with you. So there are 6 areas of our strategic enforcement priorities that EEOC says these are your focus until 2028. Some of them are going to be very general and broad because they're going to give room for leeway. But I'm going to talk to you about some of these that I think are very important for you to know. Eliminating barriers to recruitment and hiring. That's something that I don't think is going to go away. And that means to everything and everybody, right? People with disabilities. So when you go through, it's going to kind of break it down and say, what exactly does that mean? And what are we focusing on? What you'll see multiple times throughout these conversations of the strategic enforcement priorities is people with disabilities, specifically intellectual, mental disabilities, those kinds of things, because that's something that EEOC is really, really focused on. Those are the things that we're seeing more often. So making sure that hiring practices are not creating barriers for people to come into the work environment, or when you bring them into your work environment, that you're not segregating them to specific areas of the workplace, right? We have this massive focus on women in construction and these non-traditional roles. I don't think that will change, because that's happening, right? I went to go visit some apprenticeship programs, and they were all about how they're focusing on women, bringing women in. I got to talk to a few women in that program or in the various programs. I don't think those things are going to change. So for us, what we want to make sure that we tell employers is take a look at your practices. We might feel like what we're doing, we're sending this out in the wide masses and everybody's getting it, but then look at what you're actually bringing in and where you're putting the individuals to make sure that there's no unrecognized barriers, right? Are your hiring practices overwhelming for people with disabilities? How can we make those changes if we need to, right? To make sure that they have access to these things. So as Chip was mentioning, AI, if you're utilizing AI, does it weed out people with disabilities? Does it not give them the amount of time that they need, right, to complete this automated process or whatever it is? And so be proactive in those approaches. Vulnerable workers, what does that mean for EEOC? Again, anybody who has no idea that they have protections in the workplace is a vulnerable worker for us. My goal is to go out to the communities far outside of Houston, the rural areas that have no idea that we exist or can't get to us, to make sure that they have access to us. What does that mean for employers? If you have employees who don't know their policies, don't know the complaint processes, they're considered vulnerable workers because they don't know how to complain, how to bring things to your attention. So we're going to see them as those vulnerable workers as well. Emerging and developing issues, right? That's one of those that's very broad, that's going to allow a lot of leeway and a lot of room for interpretation. Basically, what's happening in the world is going to have an impact in the workplace, and then we're going to look at those things. Some of the areas right now that are under that area was the PWFA. It's also religious claims, right? Religious discrimination and harassment in the workplace, because when those things happen in the real world, people have the conversations with them at work, and then all of a sudden we have harassment, discrimination, things of that sort. So these things I think are just broad enough that they'll just add other conversations to that. Equal pay for all workers. So the Equal Pay Act provides gender-specific protections for people in the workplace, but the Equal Pay for All workers basically says everyone, race, disability, national origin, all of the protected statuses, age, everybody should have equal access to opportunities for receiving a fair and livable wage. And so here's the thing that I always tell people to focus on: how pay structures and compensation things are developed, and go back to make sure that they don't have a negative impact on a particular group or protected group of people in the workplace. When we're talking about areas where you know that you don't have a lot of women and you're bringing women in, are you paying them equal to what you're paying others in the workplace? We go back and we look at the statistics and find that people with disabilities are generally going to be paid less than, right, people who don't have the same disabilities in the workplace. And so they've always had the protections under the ADA, but it's something that EEOC is really kind of putting that focus and emphasis on. And I'm going to circle back to all of these in just a second. Preserving access to the legal system. So this covers like NDAs, severance agreements, arbitration agreements, things of that sort, to make sure that they don't take away rights from individuals. One of the really big focuses under this area is also retaliation, right? If you don't allow people to file complaints internally, it's a big issue for EEOC. So those are things that are going to be covered under that area. And then preventing and remedying systemic harassment. Harassment is one of those things that will not go away, regardless of what administration, regardless of the leadership of the EEOC or whatever it may be. Those things are going to stay a constant, right? And we're seeing a large increase in those cases And so for us, how do we prevent those things? How can we be out in the community, out to the organizations? Remember, even though not everybody feels that way, we're neutral. And so my job is to go to the employers and say, here are the things that we need to make sure we're doing so that these things don't happen. Best practices. There's a lot of guidance on our website for organizations to easily access to see what are the checklists, what are the things that I should be doing, what are the things that need to happen in order to prevent these things, right? Because we are still seeing that. Now, when we look at these as a whole, this is kind of going to be the framework for the cases that EEOC says, these are the spotlight cases. And if we see these cases and there's impactful things, these might be the ones we're going to litigate. So what does that mean for you as in the law field? Is that if you see these cases, just keep in mind that if there's major impact, if we see an equal pay case and many people with disabilities are not being paid fairly or equitably, that might be something the EEOC wants to litigate because it's part of the priorities that we're focusing on at least through 2028, right? And it's a good thing because at the end of the day, all of these things are very important to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Take a proactive and preventative approach to making sure that these things are not issues within the work environment. Now, one of the things that I read is that there might be some modifications to the harassment guidance. So April of 2024, EEOC put out this really lengthy, very, very lengthy guidance on harassment. When you click on it, I want to say it's like 70 electronic pages long, but it's a wonderful read if you have the time or let somebody else read and tell you the highlights. One of the things that it very first says is that this serves as a resource. It's not meant as legal advice. It doesn't have the effect of law, and it's not meant to be public in a way. Here's what it is. It is EEOC giving you our binoculars of how do we look at these cases when we're investigating. So this is a framework that investigators are using here at EEOC. So when you look at these situations, and it breaks it down by every area that we cover, it gives scenarios, it gives examples, it gives conversation from LGBTQ to pronouns to, GINA, and every aspect that EEOC addresses is provided in this guidance. It's important that we keep that there because I think, again, for transparency, for you to know and understand and realize how are we looking at these things, how are we viewing them so that you understand when you're doing your investigations, what are we going to be focusing on? So I like that. There were two key things that I want to just kind of point out to you that were in the guidance that I thought were really important. Social media. I'm a fan of it, right? I like all videos or whatever. I don't get on there to really do a whole lot of anything, fun or really educational. But what we're starting to find and see is that when we're looking at these cases and you're seeing these people post things on social media and outside of the work environment, right? And so let's say, I had a case where the supervisor was making racially derogatory comments about her subordinate on Facebook on her own time, not during the work hours, right? And so when the individual, the person who was being subjected to this unfavorable treatment and behavior had no idea why she was treating her this way, a friend of hers was like, well, you should see what she's talking about you on social media, using her by name, but all of these horrible things, shared that information. EEOC used that as evidence. Right? It happened outside of the work environment. People say, oh, it's freedom of speech. Yes. However, the actions of the person, the supervisor's actions towards that individual, this was used kind of as a basis of why she was treating this person this way. That case was quickly mediated, didn't make it the day of light to the investigative desk, probably because they didn't want us to see whom else she might have been treating unfairly in that work environment. But we do use that as evidence. And so I hear it a lot. Freedom of speech, I can say what I want. Sure, 100%, I agree with that. But if it comes into the work environment, how are we handling that, right? I did some training with some HR folks and I said, so if somebody says, oh, they're harassing me online via Facebook, Instagram, whatever the things are, and they come into the work environment, should you ignore it? And everybody's like, yeah, it happened off the clock. It's not, but they brought it into the work environment. And it's very rare that if I'm going to be saying derogatory or hurtful or harmful things to somebody off the clock, that I'm going to check in and be a nice person to that person, right? It reminds me of that old cartoon where, was it Fred and whoever, the dog, and they would chase each other, they'd clock out and they were friends, right? It doesn't happen that way. So employers need to know and understand that even though it happened offsite, if there is an impact in the work environment, it needs to be addressed, right? And so we just want to make sure. So this is really good advice. It's not legal advice, but it's just that insight of what are we looking at? What are we seeing? What do we see, right? One of the other things that I really liked that it approached was context, right? It's not what you say, but how you say it kind of conversation. And we all know that, right? One of the examples that it gives is that if somebody utilizes the term boy, majority of us might not find that to be offensive, but if it's said in the context towards an African-American person in a derogatory manner, could that be based on the person's race? Yes, it could quite potentially be. So when we're investigating, when we're looking at cases, we can't be dismissive of, oh, I wouldn't find that to be offensive. Why would you? Ask the questions? Dig deeper to understand what is the context of what was being said and how it has the impact on that person, especially if there's the protected status attached to it. So I'm appreciative of the fact that are they going to make modifications to the guidance? I'm not sure. Utilize it while you have it, print it, whatever you need to do, save it. Because at the end of the day, I just think it's a wonderful resource for anybody who handles these claims to understand what is it that we're looking at, how do we perceive these cases, and what do we do with them. Most important conversation of the day is mitigating risks. Here's the thing. I love doing training. I love helping people to understand what we can do and how we can address these situations. I'm just going to give you a couple of tips that I think are most important things, especially if you do training for your organizations that you represent. I think this is important. Now, there's nothing that says an organization has to have a policy, right? I talked to a lady yesterday. She's like, oh, we're creating these policies. Oh, that's great. I thought we had to have them. It's a good idea, but there's no federal statute that says you have to have a harassment policy. It's just a really good idea if you do, right? But when you implement them, when you have them, when you establish them, please make sure that you're enforcing them. It's not just words on a piece of paper, and training your staff. We just assume that people read that and they don't, right? I told the lady yesterday when I got hired on an EEOC 25 years ago, I got handed a bunch of paper. I did not read it. I was just happy to have a job. Most of the people that you're going to bring into the work environment, they're really probably not, majority of them may not read all of that, right? Even if you give it to them electronically. I signed my life away. I don't know what I signed when I first started work there. I probably should go back and look at that. But making sure you have that continuous training, right? When somebody comes to EEOC and says, well, I don't know what the harassment policy is, I have no idea. I got it, maybe I got it at orientation, but they've never talked to me afterwards. And then we file the claim with the organization, and the organization says, well, hold on, we train them on harassment every year, so I'm not sure what they're talking about. That's helpful for the organization, right? So train, and retrain all employees, management specifically, but all employees. We want to make sure that we're taking a proactive approach to prevention of discrimination and harassment. Why let it turn into a bigger issue, right? So how do we address these things? What can we do to make sure that people understand? The focus is on management, leadership, and supervisors, or anybody who wants to be one, to make sure that they understand how important these policies and processes are. They understand their rights and responsibilities. What are they supposed to do with this thing? We're seeing so many claims of harassment that it's just troubling to me that I think at this point it would have shifted, but it has not. But also what really disturbs me is when we look at these cases of like, why did it get this far? So there's a case that I utilize when I do training for management. It was coworker to coworker harassment. It was a set of like convenience gas stations across a specific set of states, not Texas, thank goodness. And so every day this individual would go in and he would sexually harass the female, not only the employees, but also customers. And it started out with conversations about sex and preferences and asking them for sex. And it just continually progressed to at some point, this gentleman taking his clothes off at work. I'm not sure why. Taking his clothes off at work. What I always say is like, even if you're on fire, you're supposed to stop, drop, and roll. I don't remember them saying take your clothes off, but why it got to this point, right? I don't understand why it got to this point. One of the key phrases that I highlight, underline, and bold, multiple members of management were aware and didn't do anything to correct it. Why? Right? We're going to talk about ethical in just a second. But now EEOC is litigated. That's on national news, I'm sure. There's the name of the company and all of these things that came from that when they could have just stopped the behavior. Now, the even more disturbing thing is that when they did decide finally to do something, they just put him at another location. Whole other set of people. I always say just gave him a fresh slate of people to ask to have sex and to take his clothes off who hadn't, sending nude photos, like the whole thing. We have to make sure that we're taking these preventative, proactive approaches. Leadership has to be engaged and buying in, right? It starts at the very top. And how many times do we see members of management, owners, supervisors as being the ones that create this environment? Train all of your leadership people, please, because we're seeing this. We assume that they know, but they don't know. Right? If you go and look at EEOC, like EEOC.gov is my favorite thing to go to the newsroom and read all of these cases. And I'm like, why would they do this? We assume managers, leaders, and supervisors know better, but they don't always, right? There was a case of a big restaurant where the manager was hiring somebody. The individual utilized a walking cane to get around. He was applying for a busser's job. And during the interview, the manager was like, what's wrong with you? What's the situation? How long have you been like this? Right? Not good. You would think by nature that that person would know you should not be asking that question or in that manner, but it's not uncommon, right? As an investigator, I had a case where the manager said during an interview, one-on-one interview, he said, do you mind me asking your age? And they had a whole conversation about age. You would think that we would know better. So of course, when that person didn't get the job at the restaurant, when this person didn't get the job on my case, they came and filed with the EEOC and the organization couldn't explain and justify that, right? We assume managers know, but we can't make that assumption. We take prompt and remedial action. I can't stress that enough. When you hear about discrimination, when the organization knows about harassment, whatever it is, do something. Do something. Prompt remedial is always what we're looking at. ADA cases for accommodations, harassment cases, discrimination, retaliation, prompt and remedial action. We're just going to have to stay connected, right? Because we're unsure of what's going to happen. We're going to hope for the best. But at the end of the day, stay connected to those agencies that there's the uncertainty about so that you know and understand you're staying on top of these things to make sure like, okay, we're going to need to make this shift. Right? EEOC, Department of Labor, OSHA, NLRB, I will say we're really good about putting that information out there. We share it with each other. Just stay tuned, right? We're gonna get through all of this together, and we're gonna continue to do good things in the workplace together. And then the importance of documentation. I just threw that in there because here's the thing. That is what makes or breaks cases with organizations. So if you're an attorney that represents organization, please express the importance of documentation, but also identify what type of documentation, right? When they write the person up, don't say this person came back from medical leave and they have all these issues. That's not a good documentation. We like that because it helps us. But what's important to document and what types of things should not be in writing? Documentation is what makes or breaks cases with the EEOC, right? So making sure the people that you serve absolutely know and understand that. And then the ethical approach to compliance. It's just so important, right? You want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I hope in my rainbow world that that's what people are doing. But unfortunately, 81,000 cases, and those are just the ones that we received, is not happening, right? So not have the policy, not put the poster up and think that's it, but goes beyond that, right? Making sure that we are actually carrying out, not just walking the walk, but talking the talk. All of it has to come together. So making sure that you have the policy, but that you're implementing it, you're following it, you're doing all of the right things that the policy says you should be doing. Addressing behaviors before they come unlawful. I cannot stress that enough. Like, it starts somewhere. Somebody had to have recognized that. If you're not engaged, if you're not involved in the work environment, if you're not saying decentralized location or whatever it may be, you have to get engaged, because that's not an excuse. If you go and the person files a claim with the EEOC and the organization says, well, our managers just weren't on site, therefore that's why we didn't do anything about it, is not going to get you a free get out of jail card, right? We want to know why you weren't aware. Did you know, or should you have known, is always the question. So we want to make sure that we are getting to this from the very, very beginning. It was very funny to me when I very first started doing this outreach job. The one thing that people requested the most training, and it has tapered off a little bit, but not by much, is civility in the workplace. That was the training that everybody requested. So I got to go teach people how to be nice to each other in the work environment, right? I think we should all know this, but apparently we did not. And that's still the most required training. Now, when I do the training, I talk about this slide, right? And how quickly our behaviors can progress to really bad things. So making sure that we're accountable, making sure we're getting to this before it turns into the bigger issue. And I can't stress this enough about holding people accountable, right? What we find is that people will let people slide because they're high performers, they do a good job, they're managers, they're leaders, they're supervisors, they're owners. But the more that that person has higher authority and supervision, the worse it is, right? If they're the bad actors. So we want to make sure that we're holding people accountable. It's the right and ethical thing to do. If they're not doing what they're supposed to, if they're creating these environments that can be seen as hostile or harassing, we need to address that, right? Don't let people slide, because then you don't want to become, right, part of the EEOC newsroom. We treat everybody equally, right, and fairly. Again, EEOC is about making sure that people are fair and equitable. Everybody has equal access and opportunities, and we treat people with respect. Easiest and most simple thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So I think I'm over on time. I just want to say this. I appreciate you all staying. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope this is helpful. At the end of the day, if you have questions, if there's anything that I could ever do, or if there are updates, I will share those with you and LERA. But if you do have any questions, please let me know. I'll hang around for a little bit. Thank you to Mickey for allowing this, and thank you to all of you for being present today. I'm going to close this out so that you can see.
Okay.
I'll take all of my stuff.
Just a couple of final comments, and then we'll let you go. I just want to thank Marina for pulling this together. It's a great job. I don't think I mentioned this on the when we were on the Zoom call, but Michelle Perino Taylor is going to take over as the president of Houston LERA, and so she's going to do that shortly. And I'm looking forward to taking the role of the treasurer, and so it will. And Marina and I will work closely together to keep things going. So thank you, Michelle, for really stepping up to that. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Ackerman for just hosting this wonderful meeting, and to Emily and Bernadette for all they do for us. Remember the January 16th program. I think it'll be a good one, and we'll get something out on that soon. I thank everyone for participating in this today. We had a good crowd, and that's always encouraging. And I hope that everyone has a happy holiday season, and the new year brings you many blessings. With that, I think we'll close it out. I have one comment for the people here. Make sure that you get a validation for your parking sticker. They have a little sticker out there, and they will give that to you. And anyone have any other comments or questions or things before we wrap it up? Okay. Thanks, everyone.